I want to start by saying that I'm thrilled at the positive response that our library guardian has gotten. That's what my mother and I have taken to calling it. I never expected so many people to be interested in our creature, and although many people have asked me for more stories concerning the guardian, I haven't had anything of note to report. Until now, that is. For so long, life went on as normal at the library. Although I am still a freelance writer, I now do it from my hometown, and I work days at the library with my mom. She and I take turns caring for our creature, and in so doing we have learned a thing or two about it. First, its favorite candies are Skittles, Reese's Pieces, Jolly Ranchers, and Twizzlers. Second, it loves classical novels, particularly stories about adventure. Third, it usually prefers to remain in the shadows and avoid human contact. But the status quo changed when the library began its renovations. Now, I love the library as much as my mom does. After all, I practically grew up there. There are so many things to love about it. The warm, cozy atmosphere, the plastic castle for the kids to play in, the treats my mom leaves out for the kids on the front desk. But as much as I love the library, I can't deny this one particularly painful truth. It's a dump. Ceiling tiles are constantly falling out overnight. The roof leaks and we lose tons of books to water damage every year. Plus, the water leaves disgusting brown sludge marks on the walls. The floors are stained grey with age. I think at one point they were white, but who knows at this point. The whole damn building is falling apart around us, and for years we didn't have the money to do anything about it. Recently, however, the rather dilapidated state of our library caught the attention of a few prominent members of the community who expressed an interest in donating some money for renovations. Jumping on the opportunity, my mom organized a fundraiser, and as she is rather fantastic at advertising, we raised the money in no time. Mom and I were so excited to begin renovations that we didn't even stop to think about how our library guardian would feel. We just assumed that it wouldn't even notice, what with being stuck in the basement all the time. We were very wrong about that. At first, everything seemed to be going all right. The very first thing we did was replace the roof. That prevented any further water damage from occurring while we fixed up the rest of the place. My mom was thrilled with the results. She was finally able to take away the buckets we'd had to place around the library under the bigger leaks. Our library guardian didn't seem to notice. It kept to itself, as usual. The next thing we did was rip up the linoleum floor. Initially, we had hoped to install hardwood floors over the top of the linoleum, but because the tiles were already peeling and cracking, that wasn't an option. After the asbestos test came back negative, and we knew that wouldn't be an issue, the contractors began the laborious process of ripping apart our floor. That's when my mother and I started to notice the change in our creature. Every night, we continued to leave candy for our creature. Usually, in the morning, we would find a leftover candy wrapper in the middle of the basement floor. However, after a few days of work on the floor, the library guardian made a request. I'd gone down that morning to throw away the wrapper from the bag of Skittles we'd left the night before, but it was nowhere to be found. As I searched the floor, I heard the sound of the guardian dragging itself out of its favorite corner, its spindly legs struggling with its massive girth. It seemed tired somehow, as though it wasn't strong enough to carry itself. I began to worry. The guardian crawled up to me, and I did my best not to be frightened. I knew it meant me no harm, but seeing a giant spider-like creature crawling towards you is unsettling, no matter what anyone says. As soon as the creature reached me, it spat the wrapper on the floor. Then, it shifted its body forward and began to nudge at my hand, as though asking for something. For a moment, I was hopelessly confused. And then, oh, it hit me. Our guardian was still hungry. I promised the guardian that I'd bring it back something to eat, although I was pretty certain it couldn't understand what I was saying, and went back up the stairs to explain the situation to my mom. She sent me to the store with $100 and told me to get enough hard candy to feed an army. I made sure to get all the guardian's favorites. My mom and I had worked out that the guardian didn't seem to need much food, and that it mostly subsisted on sugar. As such, I figured another bag of Skittles would probably be sufficient. I was so wrong. By the time the library closed for the day and it was time for me to read to the guardian, the book was The Hunchback of Notre Dame this time, I found the basement a massacre of candy wrappers. I stared at them all in disbelief. My God, the guardian had eaten everything. My mom and I actually stayed overnight at the library that night, worried that perhaps the guardian had eaten itself sick. However, all was quiet, and the guardian stayed safely tucked in its corner all night long. We decided that we were being too paranoid, and went back to our usual routine the next day, although we began to spend significantly more money feeding our creature. For a few more days, everything remained stable. Then, one night, there was another incident. I was reading to the creature when it dragged itself out of the corner once again. I could hear its body scraping against the floor, the labored stretch of its legs trying to reach me. I didn't turn around to look at it, not wanting to spook it, and continued on with the story. Eventually, the creature reached my side and perched on the floor next to me. It reached for me with one of its front legs, tapping my hand gently, taking great care not to stab me with its sharpness. After a moment's thought, I placed my hand on its furry body. I was incredibly cautious, trying to gauge its reaction. It appeared to like my attentions, so I began to stroke it. I was petting it almost like a dog, but it responded like a cat, a heavy, loud purr starting up deep in its belly. That's when I began to wonder if something was seriously wrong with our creature. As the renovations continued, my mother gave me a new job, focused entirely on our library guardian. She had to direct the renovations, of course, and supervise. That meant she had to be there for repainting the walls, tearing down the shelves and putting up new ones, painting a new mural on the back wall, installing a new front desk. Unfortunately, we could no longer leave the creature alone. It seemed to crave a kind of companionship, and it couldn't stand to be left alone in the basement. If it was down there alone for too long, it would send up a mournful kind of screeching. If banshees existed, well, that's the noise they'd make, let me tell you. So, Mom took an old cot that had belonged to my brother when he was a kid and set it up in the basement. I spent my days and nights down there, reading and feeding our little beast. It liked to curl up next to me, and it absolutely demanded that I pet it. Although I enjoyed our time together, its behavior was so strange that I couldn't stop worrying something bad was going to happen. My mother felt the same way, But what could we do? I mean, it wasn't like we could call the vet and say, "Hey, would you come take a look at the giant monster that lives in our basement and eats the occasional rapist?" Well, not that it was a monster to us, but we both knew the rest of the world wouldn't see it in such a positive light. So I stayed with it, day in and day out. I made sure it was comfortable and happy. I gave it all sorts of new candy to try, and it seemed to enjoy our little adventures in taste testing. But as time went on, I began to notice something alarming. Our library guardian was gradually getting bigger. By the time the renovations were just about finished, I'd been spending almost all my time in the basement for a period of about 3 months. In that time, the library guardian had gotten so, fat that it couldn't even lift itself up anymore. I watched it try to drag itself into its corner one night, but it couldn't budge an inch. So it sat on the floor, somehow managing to convey its distress to me, even though it lacked the eyes with which to do it. I stayed by its side, stroking its fur and singing quietly until its despair subsided. During our time together, I'd learned that it rather liked being sung to. I could sense that something was different that night. Something was going to happen, only I had no idea what. When my mom came down to check on me, I told her my suspicions. She agreed to stay the night with me and help me take care of our guardian, our protector, our friend. It seemed to enjoy our company, and it tried to snuggle closer to us as I draped a blanket around it, keeping it warm. It was about midnight when it began to happen. Our creature had begun making this awful moaning, keening noise around 10 that night. Mom and I had stroked its fur and whispered to it, trying to soothe it. We tried to read to it, but soon the noise became so loud that our voices couldn't be heard. I tried to school my face, look calm and composed, but inside I was panicking. I felt sick with terror. When it hit midnight, the creature went into a frenzy. Its legs scrabbled desperately on the floor, trying to lift its body and turn itself over. I found its behavior very strange. Exposing your belly can be such a vulnerable position. And this was not a creature that liked to be vulnerable. Its struggles were so pathetic, it was heartbreaking. My mother and I reached out to it at the same time and turned it on its side, allowing its belly to breathe freely. Its great maw was gasping violently, its teeth on display like knives. I had forgotten about how terrifying its abdomen was, especially when it was aimed right at you. My mother moved to sit by me, holding my hand as we continued to stroke the creature's fur. All of a sudden, my mother stopped and turned to me, her eyes bright as though alight on something important.
"You don't think..."
she began, but before she finished the question, it happened. The creature gave a deafening shriek, so loud I thought somebody might overhear and call the police as late as it was, and its abdomen opened. It looked as though its body was being ripped apart, its mouth and teeth stretching to the breaking point, exposing a deep black cavern, and something was wriggling down inside it. I screamed and scrambled away, overcome by fear, as our guardian lay agonizing on the floor. My mother, however, reached inside its maw with both of her hands, pushing inside until she was elbow deep in the creature. "Mom, don't!" I shouted, but it was too late. My mother re-emerged, something small and black and slimy held in her arms.
"Cassie, get over here, now!"
You know how scary my mom is? She was kneeling in front of a giant heaving creature with a black ball of what the hell is that in her arms, and I scrambled to get back to her side because she was using her no-nonsense voice. As soon as I got to her side, she handed the bundle to me, saying,
"Put this on the cot and then get back here. There's going to be more."
As I rushed to the cot, I looked down at what my mother had thrust into my hands, unable to tell what exactly it was. But then, as I set it down on the bed, its 4 legs unfurled and I gasped. It was a tiny miniature version of our own creature, with soft, downy black fur and skinny, trembling legs. It, too, had a belly that opened into a mouth, but it was missing the sharp teeth I knew it would grow eventually. Once I set it down, it rolled over onto its torso and stretched before snuggling into the bed. It didn't cry, it didn't shriek for its mother, it simply hunkered down and waited for its siblings to be born. That was when we learned our creature wasn't an it, but a she, and she was having babies. There were 10 babies in all. It seemed impossible that so many babies could fit inside anyone, even our hulking guardian, but then again, our guardian had fattened up quite a bit to carry the babies. By the time my mother pulled the 10th out, the runt of the litter, its legs remaining wrapped around itself in terror even as I placed it with its siblings, her body had deflated back to its normal size. For a few moments, my mother and I were silent, alternately staring at our creature and her children. After a few moments' rest, our guardian lifted herself up and dragged herself over to her babies. She was obviously exhausted, but she wouldn't rest until she had examined all of her children. She poked and prodded at them, licking them and rubbing herself against them. Finally, she ascertained that they were all happy and healthy, although she fretted over her little runt much more than the others. It was a beautiful, heartwarming moment, until, of course, I ruined it by saying, what are we going to do with 11 spider creature things? My mom just groaned. The babies grew up fast, which was both a joy and a problem. They seemed like healthy, happy little babies, and their mother was very happy with them, but even she was getting exasperated after a while. Sure, the basement was big, but it was nowhere near big enough to house all of the children. It was clear that something had to be done. I, of course, had no good ideas as to how handle the situation. My mother, on the other hand, has always been incredibly resourceful, and only a few days after the birth, she was struck with an idea.
Cassie, our library creature, she's been a good guardian to us, hasn't she?
I agreed, although the question was clearly rhetorical, as she continued.
Don't you think that there are other libraries out there that could use their own protectors?
My eyes lit up with understanding. This time, my mom waited for me to give my opinion. She needn't have, because she and I are very much alike, and we were both in agreement here. Yes, other libraries around the world need their own guardians, and we were given the opportunity to provide them. My mom made a few calls and consulted with a few other librarians she trusted. Let me tell you, librarians are a secretive bunch, and they keep their mysteries hidden well. The other librarians were hesitant to believe my mother at first, but they came around rather quickly. You would be surprised what kind of things librarians see on a daily basis, things that make basement-dwelling spider monsters seem tame by comparison. Soon enough, we had 9 takers for our little creatures. This happened to work out just fine, because while our guardian was happy to part with most of her children, she had taken a liking to the runt of the litter and wouldn't let him out of her sight. Well, we think it's a him. After all, what do we really know? My mother and I arranged for the deliveries to occur at night. I remained behind with the guardian and the other children, while she helped the delivery drivers. After all, we could only deliver about one each night. She also assisted each and every librarian with settling the creatures in their new homes, teaching them how to take care of the guardians and keep them happy. And now, all across Minnesota, there are libraries like ours, protected by their very own library guardians. As for us, well, now we have 2 library guardians. Of course, we have to be able to distinguish between them, so we decided to give them names. Our mommy we call Jo from Little Women, because she is fearless and wonderful and kind, and we both love her to death. Her child we have named Pip, for he is small, but of him we have great expectations. They are very happy in their basement home. Jo isn't lonely, even when my mom and I can't keep her company, because she has Pip by her side. Pip, although small, is growing up to be healthy and strong, at least as far as we can tell. They both come up to my mother and I when we come down to the basement. It seems like both like being read to and hand-fed, and they absolutely love when we pet them. Once you get past the teeth and the legs and the fur, they're really quite sweet. Of course, there's one thing that has been bothering me, and I can tell it troubles my mother as well, although neither of us have said it out loud yet. See, the problem is, well, how did Jo get pregnant in the first place? It's in the dustiest books that you may find the best stories.